Tomorrow, a major review into as many as 200 avoidable baby deaths at Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Trust. Newsnight learns its author will accuse clinicians of failing to investigate, to learn or to listen. The report is believed to be the biggest of its kind. We've been speaking to some of the families affected.
Absolutely devastated for what happened to us, because it is certainly true that any child at any time can be born with disabilities, but that is very different to a child who has disabilities because of something that the health service didn't pick up.
And we'll ask a former president of the Royal College of Midwives about what needs to change. Also tonight, on the first day of new negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, the Russians claim they're backing off military action in Kyiv and Chernihiv to boost the talks. But is it a genuine move in pursuit of peace? We'll be hearing from the former Chief of the Defence Staff, Lord Richards, and Victoria Nuland, the US Under-Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. And Newsnight is a site of a major Ofcom report which paints a worrying picture of our ability to spot misinformation online. The Chief Executive will be in the studio live. Good evening. There are few things more traumatic than the birth of a baby which does not go according to plan and results in ongoing medical problems, life-changing and life-threatening conditions, and at worst, subsequent death. A wide-ranging report to be published tomorrow, the biggest of its kind, reviewed 2 decades of births ending in 2017 at Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Trust, and is expected to find that at least 200 babies died, possibly unnecessarily, as a result of inadequate care. Many more suffered life-changing injuries, and poor care caused too the deaths of several mothers during childbirth. Tomorrow's report is expected to have far-reaching implications for the Trust itself and for wider maternity care right across the NHS. For the families affected, there is some hope it might help bring some clarity following a deeply painful chapter. Here's our UK editor, Seema Kotecha, and a warning that some people might find this report distressing.
Charlotte Cheshire used to call her son Adam a miracle baby. After a very difficult labour which nearly cost her life, she was told he was a healthy, bright boy. But months later, he was diagnosed with a series of conditions, including serious developmental problems.
He was first diagnosed as hearing impaired, then a few months later as visually impaired. After that, a diagnosis of asthma because he was admitted to hospital multiple times over a 2-year period. And then eventually, when he was 2.5, we were told that he was autistic. And it's ultimately become clear over the years, because he's now 11, that he's got very significant learning difficulties. So he's 11 years old, but developmentally he's about 4.
She says the lack of care she and Adam received from the Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Trust led to him being the way he is, something the Trust strongly denies. How sure are you that his condition is down to a lack of care that you say he received at the Trust?
As sure as I can possibly be, because ultimately there were so many signs that they missed, because, as I said a few minutes ago, they actually noticed him grunting, and it's recorded that they noticed him grunting, but they didn't do anything about it. I told them repeatedly that he's crying, his cry sounds wrong, and no matter what I could do, he wouldn't be soothed. Through that period, there are so many things that I believe went wrong.
The Cheshires are one of almost 2,000 families claiming to be affected by the maternity scandal at the Trust. An inquiry into the care provided to mothers and babies was launched in 2017 after several baby deaths were brought to the attention of the government. Since then, the review has heard from more than 1,800 families, making it the largest inquiry of its kind, and tomorrow the findings will be published in full. The review has looked at cases from 1997 to 2017, where reported neglect and failings have allegedly led to stillbirths, babies born with disabilities, neonatal deaths, and maternal deaths. It's written by senior midwife Donna Ockendon. She compiled the interim report published in 2020, which looked at the first couple of hundred cases. Newsnight understands that tomorrow's report will say that the key contributing factors to the mistakes were as follows: a failure to investigate deaths, to learn from them, and to listen to the women affected. Now, from the families we've spoken to who've been in briefings today with the author of the report, we understand that the report will be highly damning and that it will list more horrific experiences that women went through at the Trust, as well as giving details as to how more babies could potentially have been saved. In 2020, Donna Ockendon told MPs there were what clinicians described as a culture of normal birth at any cost. She said there were a number of cases where, had a baby been born by caesarean section, the outcomes may well have been better. Some believe a traditional hospital setup is partly to blame.
Their voices were ignored. So when they tried to complain, they were dismissed. They weren't taken seriously. They always put staff before patients, and the patients were women. And it always used to really frustrate me that they were not seeing the women as the focal point of what they were doing in a maternity department.
The full report is expected to explore whether a drive towards vaginal births contributed to the events at the Trust. In the early 2000s, concern had been growing about what experts had told a parliamentary inquiry was an over-medicalisation of birth. In England, 1 in 4 babies was born by C-section, but the interim report found that over 2 decades, the rate at the Trust was between 8 and 12% lower than the England average. The Trust is now under investigation by police. Tomorrow's report will be anything but an easy read and will once again draw attention to the horrific experiences many have endured at their most vulnerable.
Ultimately, absolutely devastated for what happened to us, because it is certainly true that any child at any time can be born with disabilities, but that is very different to a child who has disabilities because of something that the health service didn't pick up.
Seema Kotecha there, and Donna Ockendon's report will be formally published at 10 a.m. tomorrow. We asked the Shrewsbury and Telford NHS to respond to the allegations against it. In a statement, it said it took full responsibility for the failings in care, the way it handled the aftermath, and the manner in which it communicated to those involved. The Trust apologised for the hurt it had caused, but added apologies alone are not enough. And while we still have much more we need to do, we've delivered all the actions the Trust was asked to do following the first Ockendon report, and have made strong progress in improving the care we provide with partners, including through significant investment in additional staff and training. Well, we talk now to the former president of the Royal College of Midwives, Professor Leslie Page. Professor Page, thank you very much for joining us. At least 2,000 families affected. We don't know the full details, but we know that something went devastatingly wrong. Failure to listen to women, to put women above the staff, failure to investigate, failure to learn. And these were the actions of doctors, nurses and midwives.
Absolutely tragic, indefensible. I haven't seen the report yet. I've just been hearing the reports coming through in press and media today. But I can't imagine how those families must be feeling. And tomorrow must be such a difficult day for them. Although I hope it will bring some resolution and some sense that we can learn from what they went through. But we must make sure that something like this never happens again.
And I'm sure it will also bring more anger at the way that women were treated. The interim report in 2020, Donna Ockendon said part of the problem was to the effect that there was too much focus on so-called normal births. The culture of normal births at every cost was the way that Seema Kotecha put it. Is that something that you recognise? You were the president of the midwives. Is that something you recognise, that it was normal, so-called normal births at any cost?
Well, I would hate to think that people were pushing for normal birth at any cost, but, I have to accept if that's a finding of the inquiry. And of course, what I would want women to have is a birth that's right for them. Some women would want a normal birth, and that's appropriate for them, and some women would want an intervention. And so the whole focus is actually talking with women, listening to women, giving them information. The decision is theirs, but it's the birth that's right for them.
But you heard from that mother with her son there that actually a disability due to the method of birth is a different thing to someone that is born because he has an inherent or she has an inherent disability. Was there pressure to decrease caesareans across the NHS when you were head of midwives?
Well, I wasn't head of midwives, I was president of the Royal College of Midwives.
But yeah, a very senior figure among midwives.
Well, I wouldn't say that there was pressure to decrease caesarean sections, but there was policy at government level, at international level, and there was certainly support for reducing unnecessary caesarean sections. But I wouldn't want to see...
How many, I mean, literally, how many unnecessary caesarean sections do you think there were? I mean, people might not choose to have a caesarean section. It might be the best way for that birth to take place.
Yes, but I think it's really important that women still have a choice and they have the birth that's appropriate for them. And in the Shrewsbury and Telford Trust, there was a government policy to reduce the number of caesarean sections.
Only in that trust?
No, I think that there was government policy
across the board.
at the time, yes. And
did you complain about that? Did you push back against that?
No, I didn't complain about that because actually it was based on evidence that if you have a very high level of caesarean section, that it can cause problems, because caesarean sections, it's major surgery, it's associated with risks. I certainly wouldn't push against caesarean sections if women needed and wanted a caesarean section.
But you stepped away in 2017, your term was over, but your successor has apologised. Apologised just last month for that whole emphasis that was promoted by midwives, doctors, nurses.
Well, I think that you would have to ask the president, the president's CEO of the Royal College.
But do you regret that
that
policy went on for so long?
I don't regret that that policy went on for so long, because I believe that actually it was based on evidence. But what I do stand for is women having care that's appropriate for them. We need to listen to women. And what I would say to you, Kirsty, is that this is a very, very complex picture.
Yeah. But if it was based on evidence, then that is not particular to the particular woman, is it?
No,
it's
exactly.
Evidential. And the problem with an evidential approach is it doesn't cater for the individual woman. It doesn't cater for the woman that needs a section, needs intervention. It's a kind of thing like, evidentially, we don't think caesarean sections are a good idea, and so therefore we're not going to do them unless absolutely at the last minute. I mean, let me just put to you, I think it was the thing was that interventions and C-sections were to be the last choice, not the first choice. That was surely the mistake.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that philosophy, because care has to be appropriate for the woman. And you're absolutely right. This policy was working at population level. But what midwives and doctors need to do is work with the individual woman and talk with her and take into account her health, the health of the baby. Should
there actually be, as it were, a contract? Should the pregnant mother have actually a contract that she says, I want to make sure this happens, I want to make sure that happens, I want to be listened to? Because, I mean, there'll be a lot of women out there thinking, this is possibly not just about Shrewsbury and Telford.
Well, what I would recommend, and most women should have access to one, is a birth plan in which the women can actually work with midwives and write down what they want, and if things don't go to plan, what they would like. But that has to be done through a relationship with the midwife or the doctor who's looking after them. And so we can't just have a contract. That's so impersonal.
No, a contract was the wrong word. The birth plan was the word I was looking for. So it should be mandatory to have a birth plan.
Well, I think there's a birth plan in all of the records, and I would certainly promote birth plans, because it's a very good opportunity to talk with a woman, find out what's right for her. What we need to do is make sure that staffing is safe, that staff can speak up if they're concerned about things, and we need continuity of care. We need to continue to improve staffing so we get continuity of care, which we're already starting to roll out, so women have a relationship with one midwife.
Professor Page, thank you very much indeed.